Welcome back to another episode of Local Search Tuesdays. This week I've got a totally new and ridiculously awesome conference presentation to share with you. A few weeks ago, I hopped a plane down to Myrtle Beach for an epic back-to-back conference lineup with the Unfair Advantage Automotive Mastermind Group and the Carolinas Independent Auto Dealer Association's annual conference. I only had a 20-minute slot at the Mastermind show, but I packed it with awesome info from our huge Google Business Profile study and info from over 500 auto dealer site audits. Check it out.
This is the scary truth about automotive SEO. You're watching this on my video series, so you already know who I am, but for those of you who haven't seen me share a presentation on here before, you may or may not know that I'm lucky enough to get to speak at a lot of conferences all over the world. And sometimes you see some presenters that might have some great info, but they're not very engaging to watch on stage. A lot of times they're going to stand right behind the podium, just locked into place, and they'll probably have their head turned around towards their slides, so you see the back of their head because they're just reading their own slides. And most of the time it's just a plain white background and it's black Arial font, and each slide is packed with bullet points, and they just sit there and read bullet points. And we all know that that's not engaging. So I firmly believe that bullet points kill kittens, and today's presentation will be entirely kitten safe. And if you haven't seen me share a presentation before or seen me speak live, I am obsessed with movies. So there is always a movie theme that goes along with every presentation, and it's always going to include at least one movie in that theme for every year in the last 50 years. And today's theme is obviously horror movies. So we've got 63 references to horror movies, and there is attribution to the side. So if there's something that you aren't familiar with, you can see what the movie is and maybe have a cool list of movies to go watch later. And I know some of you might be a little freaked out that it is horror, and you might be a little scared, but I can tell you the scariest thing that you're going to see is some of the 80s fashion. So let's kick this off. Why the long face? Do you need a hand figuring out what you need to do to get your Google Business Profile to rank better? Luckily, I've got a few to spare. I know there's so much conflicting information out there. Sometimes you feel like you're going to lose your head when you're trying to figure out what you need to do. But today, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to bend over backwards. You just have to follow the basics and be a little bit better than your competitors. I've got some crazy data to share with you, and some of it might even rock your face off. But if you pay attention to what's going on and how we've run the test and what you could do yourself, you'll be able to make sure that your Google Business Profile turns a lot of heads and attracts a lot of customers. So strap in. I'm going to go fast. In person, I only had 20 minutes to present this, but I know you're watching this online, and so I don't want to take up too much time. I'll cut out some of the story time and try to burn through it as quickly as possible so you get all the awesome information. But SEO is typically the most important marketing channel for car dealers. If you go in and look at Google Analytics, you'll see that your biggest source of inbound traffic and your biggest source of leads is organic traffic from Google. In most cases, you're going to get more from Google than from every other source combined. But I've been talking about this stuff for over a decade at automotive conferences. How to do SEO, why SEO is important, what specifically you need to do. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to talk about some data from a big research project that we are doing that will show you in the real world what people are actually doing. So we're not talking theoretical, we're talking actual. Because you'll be able to beat your competitors if you could see what they're actually doing or what they're not doing. So this project that we're working on right now is pulling data from Google Business Profiles across three major verticals: car dealerships, attorneys, and cannabis dispensaries. So for the car dealer side of things, we pulled data on over 2,700 dealership Google Business Profiles. And here's how we pulled those 2,700. Now we're looking only at map, pack, and local finder ranking. So this is how the Google Business Profile is ranking, either in the map pack with the 3 results, or when you click view more and you see all the results. We looked through the top 20 for each of these queries in each of these cities. So the queries were Ford dealer, Chevrolet dealer, Toyota dealer, Jeep dealer, Kia dealer, and used car dealer, and we ran it in each of those 14 cities and pulled all the information that we could pull from a really awesome tool called Places Scouts. So Places Scout is really awesome. We use it for a lot of other things, but they were able to pull all of this data. We ended up with over 1 million data points for all of these different Google Business Profiles. So the full study will be released closer to the end of this year. But when we start breaking down information, we see some interesting patterns. The category breakdown wasn't that surprising, considering the major category we were looking at was multiple different brands. The surprising thing here is the second most common primary category in the Google Business Profiles was just the generic car dealer, where realistically, looking at these terms, it should be either Ford or Chevy or Toyota or Jeep or Kia or even used car dealer. But we have 19%, basically 1 out of 5 of those 2,700 had car dealer as their primary category. And over a quarter of these dealerships only had a single category selected, even though there is space to select up to 10 categories, and there are 10 categories that apply to pretty much any dealership. If we look at all of the reviews, I counted them all up, there were over 2.7 million reviews across the 2,700 Google Business Profiles. So yeah, if you are doing the math in your head, that means it's almost 1,000 reviews per profile on average. So 979 reviews on average across all the dealerships. And then if we're looking at the website link, I've talked before many times about the importance of UTM tracking so that things are correctly attributed inside of Google Analytics. And only 53.7, a little over half, had UTM tracking on their website link. And if we look at the Q&A section, even though this is more a point of conversion than something that influences how well you show up in searches, but dealerships averaged a little over 6 questions asked in the Q&A section. So a lot more questions being asked to car dealers than a lot of other verticals. If we look in the last year, the last 12 months, over half of the dealerships did not publish a single Google post, which is crazy because Google posts are basically free ads that show in search results. Why wouldn't you want to share Google posts? And car dealers have some unique rules that other businesses are not allowed to do things that car dealers can in the Google Business Profile platform. One of those is car dealers are allowed to set up a separate profile for the service department and for the parts department. But only a little over half of the dealerships had those separate departments set up, which is problematic for those dealers because they won't show up as well for those service and parts searches. And one of the other unique things about dealerships is they can have an inventory feed that displays a live view of their inventory in their Google Business Profile, kind of like a shopping feed, but it's not something that you're paying per click like Google Shopping. And 29% of the dealerships didn't have this enabled yet, and it's been out for quite a while. If we look across to see some other interesting patterns, let's look and see which profile had the most photos in a single profile. It was actually a used car dealership that had almost 16,000 photos in one Google Business Profile. And if we're looking at the Q&A section, there was a Ford dealership that had 108 questions that had been asked of the dealership. And if we're looking for which profile had the most reviews, there was a Toyota dealership that had 20,620 reviews asked, or reviews left. That's a whole lot of reviews. So lots of interesting stuff that we found there. I also wanted to share some awesome information about my SEO scoring matrix. I use this matrix and have used this matrix for years at NADA 20 group meetings. And I've also used it at conferences whenever someone raises their hand and says, hey, I'd like you to score my dealership's website and see how I turn out. Basically, it is a down and dirty, quick SEO audit. Now, this is a tactical audit, not a strategic audit. So strategy is debatable. Some people will do different things than others, but on the basic tactics of what you're doing, do you need to edit the title tag? Do you need to edit the H1? Do you need to edit the content? There are some basic SEO best practices that need to be followed. That's what we're looking at here. We're not looking at the strategy. So I collected all the scores that I could find for the last year, and that was about 500 dealerships that I have scored personally. So like I said, it's like a mini audit. It's looking at the 4 major areas that affect organic visibility at a tactical level. So each area has a maximum point value that basically equates the importance of that signal area in Google's algorithm. So we're looking at on-site, which is the content on your site, the technology of your site, and how that content is optimized. Links is inbound links pointed to your website. GBP is obviously your Google business profile, and reputation management is your reviews on Google and Yelp and how you respond to those reviews. The average scores looked pretty much like this. The average score that we saw overall was a 22.5 out of a possible 100 points. Now, keep in mind, it's basically impossible to get 100 points, but if you're doing good SEO, you'd be in the 75 to 95 range. So the average for on-site is just 4.7 points out of a possible 44. The average for links is 2.2 out of 10. Average for Google Business Profile is 11.7 out of 32, and average for reviews is 3.9 out of 14. Notice, if we're looking percentage-wise, on-site is the most important, but it is the one that is ending up with the least score. It's the one that is most often overlooked. If we look across all the scores and see who had the highest score came in from a VW dealer who came in with an 83.6. And then if we're going to look at that, let's look and see who did the worst. The worst was a Stellantis dealer, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, for those of you who are not in automotive, who actually scored a negative 42.5 out of a possible 100 points. Hopefully those guys were not paying for SEO, because that'd be really disappointing. And we can look also across the matrix to see which website providers were the most common. So across those 500 some odd dealerships, here's the breakdown of what the website providers look like. 34% on dealer.com, 28% Dealer Inspire, 20% DealerOn, 13% on all the other platforms, and then 5% on Synchro. Now, keep in mind, it's not really surprising that dealer.com is the most common site. They are on every OEM approved program. They've been around for forever. They are the #1 website provider by numbers. But we can break down the average scores per site provider, get a little more insight into which websites performed better. So if we're looking at the average score per provider, Dealer Inspire came in on top with a 24.9, DealerOn at a fairly close second with 20.9, Dealer.com, even though they had a lot more sites, significantly lower score, Synchro below that. And then if you're not on one of those top 4 platforms, you fall into the other platforms category, which clearly is not great. But let's ignore the links and the reputation management and the Google business profile and just look at the on-site score. So again, we're looking at the website providers, but just the on-site, which is the content on the site, how that content is optimized. Dealer Inspire still comes in up top with a 7.3, but that's only a 7.3 out of a possible 44. DealerOn comes in second again with a 3.9. Dealer.com with not even a full point, Synchro with a negative point, and other platforms with -3. And website content and how that content is optimized is literally the most important part about SEO. So I don't know. I'm not sure about you, but I'm pretty sure if I was a dealer, I'd want to be on Dealer Inspire. So we can look at the scores broken down by brand as well. The highest total score by brand on average was Subaru with an average of a score of 32.5 points. The highest average on-site score was actually Acura. They got an 8.9 average out of the possible 44. The brand that got the highest link score was Toyota with a 5.5 out of 10. That's a really high score for someone not doing active, really badass SEO. If we look at Google Business Profile, Subaru comes in with 18.7 points as the highest overall average. And the best reputation score was actually Mercedes with 7.7 out of 14. Now, if I want to look at average scores for the individual elements, the average score of everyone for the on-site section is 3.4 out of 44. That's 7.7%. The average score for links, 1.9 out of 10. That's a 19%. The average score for Google Business Profile, 10.5 out of 32, 32.8%. And the average score for reviews is 29.3%. Again, we look at it from a percentage basis, the on-site is by far the area that is most lacking. So you're probably thinking, okay, Greg, what does it all mean? If you want to put your best foot forward and have the best chance of showing up more often in searches, you need to be on the Dealer Inspire website platform, and you need to be really aggressive with SEO. And that needs to concentrate mostly on the content on your site and how that content is optimized. You also need to make sure that that includes being really aggressive with optimizing your Google business profiles. And yes, that is plural because you should have those separate departments set up. And you need to be aggressive with your reviews on Google and make sure that you've got a whole lot of reviews. Remember, the average is almost 1,000 reviews per dealership. If you'd like to get your dealership scored, and I haven't scored you before, and you want to see how you compare against all this, obviously you can't give me a card because you're watching this online, but you can pop me an email. I'll share my email address here in just a second. But that was the end. Thank you so much for taking that crazy roller coaster ride with me today. And now when you're thinking about how your Google business profile or your website is showing up in searches, you won't be so much of a basket case because I've opened your eyes to the power of doing real world research to see what your competitors are actually doing instead of just following blindly whatever your SEO best practices might say. So now you've got the key to success, and you'll be able to have the hook to attract more potential customers, and you'll be able to break out of your shell and do better SEO moving forward, so everyone will be happy. That was the scary truth about automotive SEO, and there is my email address. It's simple. It's just greg@searchlabdigital.com. If you're watching this video and you'd like me to score your site, just send me your URL and I'll be happy to score it. Also, you don't have to be a car dealer. I've got a generic version of this that works for any other type of vertical. Happy to score your sites as well. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, you can email me because, as always, at the end, there is a list of all of the movies in order of release date. So you've got something awesome to watch later. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks for checking out the presentation. Hopefully you dug it. And if you'd like to dig into info like this even more, make sure you check out the driving sales webinar that I'm doing next Tuesday. You can go to register at wp.drivingsales.com/webinar. But for this week, we're definitely out of time, so you know what that means. Put your hand on the screen right here. We totally just high-fived because you learned something awesome. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of Local Search Tuesdays.